All right, well, so this is pretty cool to be on the main stage talking about sports betting. And I'm with some really great company. I mean, Matt is obviously involved with probably the most important sports book in Vegas these days, and Chad is the preeminent author on all things gambling, and Bob, to my right, is the most successful NBA bettor probably ever. So.
I don't know if that's true. But
You said that the other day.
I never did.
You did. In the privacy of our own home, you said that. I mean,
I think you were misunderstanding
okay, well,
what I was saying.
let's start with a very simple question.
Can I say one thing first? Did you guys notice that the background there actually is
I know, it's pretty cool.
point spreads
it's pretty
and
cool.
totals?
It's pretty cool. Thanks for taking up the time to point that out. Okay, so first question I'm sure that everyone here wants to know, especially the aspiring analytics people, are can a smart analytics person make money betting sports? And if the answer to that is yes, where do you guys see, or what is one example of a way that they can get edge? I don't know. Do you want to take that first?
Start with Matt.
Well, I think that as the largest licensed bookmaker in the country, one of the biggest challenges we face is the speed and the amount of information that every bettor has, not just the sharp bettors, not just the premier sports bettors, but the novice bettors are better equipped than they ever were. So going back 15 years ago, people would come in and they had no idea who was playing, or even some of the people on the teams, and they come in now and they know everybody who's hurt and who's out tonight, and they get it on their phone, and they're just much more well-equipped than they ever were, and they have much more resources of different types of analytics and trends, and they all come in with a plan, and so we're dealing with a much more prepared bettor than we ever were prior.
Well, so is your answer yes or no as to whether a smart analytics
Well,
person
as the
could-
sports book, I would say in the long run that maybe some people can, but we constantly adapt the market and do what we think is the best player profiling. So as players develop systems that may be short-term successful, we try to adapt what we're doing to prevent them from being able to long-term continue to beat us.
The answer is yes.
Is that-
the answer
that's
may be
all
yes
that
in
you're
the
gonna
short
give
term.
us?
The answer is yes. I think that people, especially nowadays, because there is so much access to information, you are able to build systems for a variety of different sports that enable you to use analytics to potentially make money as a sports bettor.
Well, you said information, though, but what kind of information do you mean?
Well, it's any kind of data that you feel like you need to make a better system, whether it's scraping from a variety of different places that are offering
So play-by-play
information that you were able to build through an algorithm that you create, where you're weighting different metrics based on a formula that you feel potentially has the opportunity to make you money. But the challenge isn't in building the formula. The challenge is, can you then find a way to get the money down so you can actually make money off of that stuff? I think it's two different things. A lot of people are smart enough to build a formula that is really, really good. The challenge is to bet with enough volume so it actually is worth your while.
Well, let's get back to that. But go to Bob now. Kind of tell, what do you think?
Well, of course you can. I mean, I don't think anyone would be here if they thought the answer was no. It's just a question of how much work you're willing to put in, what types of data you want to use. I think if I was starting out, I would start out with the minor sports, stuff like college basketball or maybe golf, NASCAR, tennis, that type of thing, where the lines aren't nearly as strong as they could be. And you're not really encumbered by the limits because you're starting out, you have a smaller bankroll. If you want to actually bet more money, you have to get into the bigger sports like football, basketball, baseball, etc. And those lines are a lot tighter, and you have to spend a lot more in terms of research and development or time to beat those sports.
So you make your primary income through betting on NBA, right?
I don't bet on any other sports. I just bet on basketball.
And why did you choose the NBA?
I just like basketball, to be honest. I mean, I didn't really start out saying, oh, I have a way to beat basketball, therefore I'm going to bet basketball. I started out saying, I really love basketball. I'm going to watch a lot of basketball. Then I started betting on basketball. I was unsuccessful when I first started out, but pretty quickly I figured out what would or wouldn't work. I kind of lucked into finding some systems, and I feel like I do have a decent ability to watch a basketball game and understand what's going on and what will happen in the future.
What are some inefficiencies or some advantages that you saw early on that you thought might give you an advantage over the bookmakers?
Well, back when I started, the bookmakers, it was just hard to believe, they were even more clueless than they are now. I mean, so it was like really, really easy to exploit what they were doing. Nowadays, the book.
I mean, the example is what? The halftimes, right?
Just half times, but even spreads and stuff earlier on, there's just all kinds of inefficiencies that, it's tough to be a bookmaker. Just take that out of the way. It's tough because I'm dealing just in one sport, whereas a bookmaker's dealing in every sport, every game. So it is a lot easier to be the guy who's picking and choosing spots that are bad, versus the guy who has to post a line for everything and hope that every line is fair. So there was just, for me, I started out betting game totals, halftime spreads early on, and I just kind of noticed that certain teams were doing certain things in certain situations, and I found that the line makers weren't really adjusting to that.
So an example of those certain
I'm not
things.
talking about certain examples, and that's because it doesn't matter. It was in the past.
Right, so then
Well, because maybe someone's still, I don't know, utilizing some of those things nowadays. I don't know. Why are you trying to take food off my plate?
because all these people showed up, they want to know some
I don't
things.
know why they showed up. I had no idea anyone would show up.
So
I think it's true in this sense. To his credit, he's right. We have to post lines on every game, and what people need to understand is the myth that a sports book is trying to post lines that are there to predict the outcome of a game is wrong. We don't make lines to predict the outcome of a game. We make lines in anticipation of where the action will come on that game. So it's very possible that very acute players can come up with systems that say, look, my predictive model says the game should land very far apart of it, but due to our high ability to do player profiling of some of our substantial players, we anticipate action coming a certain way and thus put out a certain line based on where we anticipate action rather than predictive outcome of a particular event.
That was very confusing. So explain to me.
What he's trying to say is that they're not really good at predicting the outcome, but they think they're trying to get a line that'll cater to their specific client base.
And do you think that that's where the inefficiencies come from?
No, I don't think so. I think that's, I think in general, regardless of whether you're trying to profile or not, if you do have a customer who's a square who's going to lose, do you really want to shade them half a point or a full point and try to bludgeon them over the head? You already have an 11 to 10 edge, you're getting 4.5% on every bet, and if guy A, world champion, whoever A comes walking in, and he's going to bet the favorite, I think it's a little unethical just to jack the point up another half a point.
Hypothetically, some fighter.
Whoever,
boxer
I don't even know. Yeah, no, I'm just saying, whoever it might be. If you know a guy's always betting the favorite in the over, I think as a sports book, it's, I don't know if it's unethical, but it's definitely
Yeah, I don't think we target in any individual players. I think that's probably taking a pot shot. I think it's more of an anticipatory thing of like, look, we have an entire base of people who, the New England Patriots are very popular, and you can anticipate that New England Patriots are going to be in a primetime game, and because of that, the New England Patriots in a Sunday night or a Monday night situation, which are two bailout spots, you're going to get heavy action on that one
the
side.
line's a little bit better there.
So in a specific case now, we're talking about certain teams being public, right? And like this year, can you talk a little bit about what happened across the industry with the Ravens? Did the books lose a lot of money on them because of
the Ravens were
situation?
the Ravens were a really interesting scenario for the sports books in the playoffs this year because going into the second round of the playoffs, essentially they were the longest shot, and everybody had gotten used to the Ravens being a one and done team. They always win one playoff game and then completely pack it in, and I think a lot of people anticipated that to happen this year. And they went on the road and had that unbelievable game with Denver, and then had the unbelievable game with New England where they held them scoreless for the second half. And even going into the Super Bowl again, despite all the momentum that team and the great storylines around them with Ray Lewis and all the public notoriety surrounding it, everyone still thought San Francisco was going to blow them out. So it was interesting that Baltimore was very good for the sports books because all the public faded them game after game after game.
Huh. So there wasn't a lot of Baltimore exposure for the sports
No,
books?
they were just one of those teams that everybody, because they have this history of getting there and having minor success and then completely failing for whatever reason, nobody bought into it, and everyone continued to fade them round after round, it seemed like.
And you don't bet any football, right? What's the reason?
I like basketball. I like watching basketball. I'm not really gambling for an edge or for excitement. So for me, I think in order for me to be successful, I have to spend a lot of time and research and effort and investment and time. I just don't. I watch enough basketball and sports as it is that I don't want to start watching other. I don't really watch football, to be honest.
From a pure money-making standpoint, if you were looking at NFL, MLB, or NBA, which one would you beyond? Yeah, obviously NBA is your thing, but like do you see problems in the other two? Like you were mentioning the high variance in the NFL.
Right. Well, the football is the best because if you were able to come up with something, you could just bet a lot of money on it. So, but the reason why you could bet a lot of money on football is because it's very difficult to predict. It's almost a random game in some sense. Point spread is very efficient in football. You know, the ball isn't even round. You know, the ball bounces, it goes this way, it goes that way. It's just like a very, very, you're basically flipping coins and doing so, you know, having to lay 11 to 10 to do so. So football for me is a very random sport. One play can be like 35, 40% of your bet, and it could be a fluke game. So because of that, football is very difficult to bet and to actually know that you have an edge. The other thing is if you did have an edge in football, and let's say NFL football, the teams only play 16 games a year in the regular season. Even if you had your edge, you wouldn't be able to apply it too often. You'd be sitting there trying to pick and choose your spots. You'd have very few bets. And you wouldn't really know what the long run is in football either because your sample sizes are very small. Whereas baseball is the opposite of that. It's a pretty pure game. The vigorish is a little bit lower in baseball as well. Teams play 162 games. If you did have an edge, you could really apply it in that sense. And basketball is like that too. There's 82 game seasons. The game is, there's a little bit of variance in basketball. It's getting to be more random now than it was in the past with the evolution of the three-point shot. But it's still a pretty pure game statistically.
So can you talk a little bit about that? I know we've talked about this three-point shooting variance, and what do you mean by that?
Well, it's just the ball either goes in or it doesn't. It's a random shot, and teams are shooting more three-pointers now. So because of that, the game of basketball, one individual game of basketball is a lot more random than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago. Just because if you looked at a graph of the number of three-point shots attempted per game, it's been steadily increasing over the last few years.
Now, as far as you go, you know a lot of sharp bettors. What sport do you think is the most beatable, or have you seen the most of your sharp bettors beat?
Well, it's a lot of what Bob was saying earlier is about the games where nobody's paying attention. So college basketball has always been one of those sports where, because the bookmakers have a lot of other sports to pay attention to, especially in that November, December time frame, they have college football, they have the NFL, they have the NBA, they usually have hockey. It's hard to post all the lines for college basketball that they need to post given the number of games, the number of teams that are playing. So that's always been one. It's also one of those sports where Bob is a huge NBA bettor because he is a huge fan of the NBA. People who bet on college basketball professionally are often huge fans of college basketball. They love watching every single game, and that is one of those sports that you really have to work at in order to become a very good bettor at it. And it's a difficult one for the books to keep up with because there's all this other stuff going on, and there are changes day to day in those sports in the way that sort of 18 to 22-year-olds play in the game that you're not going to be in tune with if you're not watching every single game. So that's certainly one that a lot of guys I know look to find advantages in, but tennis is certainly one. MMA is one. Golf. It's like all these sports that are getting a lot more attention, and they are becoming much more available in terms of a market, are places where these guys are, bettors are going to be the first to market in finding the advantage. And so that's where a lot of them are going.
I completely agree with Chad that college basketball in November and December presents the biggest challenge to bookmakers. With 350 Division I teams and teams playing a non-conference slate, so you don't always have historical data of these teams matching against each other. They often play teams they haven't prior, and so and your focus is so focused on college bowl games, which are creating so much attention and action, and NFL, which is winding down to the playoffs, and again, hockey starting, NBA starting. Sometimes you can lose focus on some of these smaller conference schools, and I think acute players can probably.
So, if back to this idea of information and knowing information, are there examples? Can you give us an example of a time when you've made a line and had to adjust it based on getting interesting information from a college place? Is there do you guys know what's going on campuses?
Yeah, college presents a lot of the stranger situations than some of the other, because there's so many teams and the information flushes out later than it would for NBA teams. If Kobe or something happens to him or any of these NBA players, it's immediately out there. As some of these college schools players get suspended or for all these rules violations. NBA players or professional players in any sport normally aren't suspended for rules violations. They miss curfew or they miss practice. And it's very common in college, and you're dealing with over 300 schools, and some of them have little to no media coverage, and so the information can come late, it can come slow.
How do you get that information?
Well, we get it from a lot of sources, as many as we possibly can. We have to leverage every resource that we can because, you know, the bettors have it. You know, someone has it. So, you know, we do our best to leverage every media outlet that we can and monitor as much as we can. But in college hoops, it's a very trying, difficult challenge for the sportsbooks.
I know a lot of guys, you know, their Twitter feeds are loaded with the beat writer for every guy in every sport. They're going to the school newspaper websites in college basketball. And when you think about it, there are guys I know who they used to call the scorer's table before a game was happening to find out if certain players were playing and pretend that they were calling from another school, that they weren't really bettors, to get that information. Now you can get that information by just having a very active, voluminous Twitter feed. And so the ability to get all that, it honestly puts bookmakers, it should put bookmakers at a disadvantage, because if I'm a guy who's betting college baskets, I'm focused on that. I've been studying that all day. I'm thinking about that all day. I'm much more up to speed than the bookmaker's going to be.
So these are like some subjective things that we're talking about, and I know that you do some subjective betting in your NBA stuff. How do you measure, or how do you balance subjectiveness with objectiveness?
I think it's good to have a baseline objective number on any game, and then with that, you can use your own subjectivity. The thing that people, you know, they talk about having data and watching a games isn't necessarily having data, but actually seeing something happen that you've seen happen, watching that with your eyes, collecting information, that's data. It's just a different type of data. It's something that you internalize. So for me, I like to have a number for every game, which is what we have. The model spits out a number. And then I just kind of handicap the teams individually, or I handicap the model if I know the model's bad at certain teams or better at other teams, or it misses something.
Give me an example of something it's missed recently that you've had to correct.
I wouldn't really necessarily say that, but if you take a look at maybe like a team like the Lakers, for instance, this year, okay, they started out with one coach, then they had an interim coach, then they got a new coach who, you know, if you were to watch, sometimes I like to watch the Laker games for whatever reason. It's like interesting to watch. There's a lot of information about them. It's always usually the last game of the night too, so you can always, I'm always watching a Laker or a Clipper game. And so, you get this new coach who says they want to score 100. He actually came in and said he thinks his team's going to score 115 points a game. So coming in, now you have all this data from the Lakers a number of years, but now the coach says that we want to score 100. So there's a difference in terms of the data isn't necessarily, the data you have on the old coach isn't necessarily relevant to what the team is now. Then even given the team now, they decided somewhere along the lines with that new coach that they were going to slow down. You know, Kobe stopped shooting, he wanted to pass, he wanted to get his teammates involved. So that's something that a model is not going to be able to catch up to that. But someone watching the games, really focusing on the Lakers or focusing on whatever team is changing their strategy, the day-to-day strategy, you can focus on that. You can maybe have like a small edge doing that.
When Kobe decided not to shoot for 7 games, what happened to their totals?
I don't know offhand, but the games were a lot lower scoring. So it was just, I think, you know, when your number one volume scorer decides he's not going to shoot and pass, and you have guys who aren't used to getting the ball in situations, I think the scoring did go down. Whether the games went under or over, I don't know. But if I had to guess, I'm guessing the games went under the total.
Do you think that bookmakers weren't paying attention? Did they not react, or?
I was more talking to the fact that my model would spit out a number, and I would discount that and be like, no, this is a different team right now. You know, we predict the score is going to be 212 or something like that, but in reality, the right number would be 206. The actual sports books do a better job of recognizing those short-term trends than they do actually knowing what a good number is. So they'll overreact to short-term variance or short-term results. So my own subjective stuff in that sense would probably match up more with what the line would be, whereas if I would just follow the models, exclusively, we would have been betting overs in games where the Lakers weren't playing an over style anymore.
I think that brings up a good point too. Like he said, just even the Lakers in that very short-term period. But we constantly have to deal with tons of things every year that make older data irrelevant or make you say, look, this number is no longer relevant, like rules changes and style of officiating when they incorporate new rules or style of play. And the rule changes in the NFL take a little while. Remember the hand-checking rule in the NBA? It had a great effect for a few months, then they finally got used to calling it. And so I think it's really important that all those things are taken into consideration because your data necessarily doesn't.
Well, so when you make a line, are there any times that you look at it not as the as the odds maker, but more just as a gambler and say, that's a bad line? If I were a bettor, I would bet one side or the other.
Sure, I think there is, but I don't necessarily know that it's a bad line. Maybe there's some times where I can look at a line and say, boy, I would take one side or another side of a line, but maybe that line works out great for the house, even regardless of the outcome, because they predict, for one reason or another, that that line is the line that will get them that equal action on both sides.
Do you like, in a situation like that, do you hope that you're skewed?
No, not necessarily. I think the goal is always, for the sports book, our perfect dream goal always has to be to somehow create equal action on both sides. And does that happen? No, not
How
normally.
would you create equal action?
That's
on both
right.
sides?
How
But
can
but
you?
how would you? So I'm just asking, how would you?
Well, obviously there's a lot of ways for us. We can, we can move lines as much as possible, but moving, you can only move a line so much before you put yourself at adverse risk. So, you don't want to leave large middle opportunities in adverse risk or arb situations. So, you just have to try to do a good job of player profiling and know, hey, if I move the line to X, player Y is going to
If I
come and
was a
take the other
bookmaker,
side.
my goal would be to have as many decisions as possible.
Yeah, I gotta say,
It wouldn't even be close because you're getting, you might lose, you have all this unbalanced action, but you're getting 11 to 10. I mean, it's so strong. 4.55% on the game is so much better than, I'm going to move the line half a point now, and now your edge just went from 4.55 to 3% on the full game total because now the number could fall in the middle. So I think like the real problems with bookmaking and betting in this, and you asked the question, can you make money betting on sports? You can, but in reality it's so difficult is because bookmaking now is like, it's more of a game of musical chairs. We're getting a bet, but we want to get rid of it, move the number, get someplace else. And you actually have most sports books are in the business of avoiding bets. And I'm not saying if I was a bookmaker, I wouldn't avoid bets. I'm just saying that's like the way it is. So Cantor Gaming probably doesn't even take bets on some of the games they're moving their lines on. They see the offshore market move a line, so they're going to move their line. And that's kind of the way bookmaking is, because the idea is they really don't know what the true numbers are. They really don't have this idea of player profiling. I mean, all that stuff is great, but in reality, the people making the lines are not in the United States. So the original line is originating offshore in Curacao, whatever, Pinnacle Sports. And then you have a bunch of sophisticated bettors who have smaller bankrolls who are willing to bet smaller amounts of money. They're hammering out the number so that by the time Cantor Gaming opens up or another sports book opens up that takes a big bet, the line is pretty good. So it's not the bookmakers who made the line, it's the actual gamblers who are betting into the line that have actually made the line, the actual opening line where you could actually bet like a real amount of money.
I think Bob is right that lines are basically now moving on what they call air. They're not moving on action. So Pinnacle puts up a line. 2 days later, everybody else is following that line, and they're putting what that line is. And then in 5 minutes, Pinnacle's going to move their line, and so everybody else is going to move their line across the board, because nobody wants to be the one who's vulnerable to getting that particularly big bet from a sharp, which is a professional gambler. I think there's a couple issues. One, I think bookmakers generally are too susceptible to what the sharp moves are, because more often than not, they're going to get a lot more money from the public than they are from the sharp. But I also feel like it's a myth that bookmakers want to have even action, because that's not how you end up
That's what he
making
just
money.
said.
I know, but I think Cantor is actually, A, I think they're a little bit different because they're much more of a volume player than most places are. But B, most bookmakers I talk to, they don't mind having decisions. They don't mind being heavy on one side. They are comfortable making a play from one side or the other. They know where they're going to want to be heavy, and they're comfortable with that because you actually don't make a lot of money. You don't build the money you need to build just by winning 11 to 10 every day.
Especially if you're moving your number all the time. You're taking a bet on a basketball game, you're taking a bet at -7, now you move the line to -7.5 and you take a bet at +7.5 and you have an equal amount of money. You just went from a situation where you were, had a 4.5% edge on one to now having probably like a 2.25% edge on the two bets, because the game will fall on 7 a certain percentage of the time. Now, God forbid you go from +7.5 down to -6.5, and now the game -7, you lose both bets and you're screwed.
Right.
And so I think the real issue for bookmakers is knowing when to move a line. Are you moving a line because the public's betting the game, or are you moving a line? If the public's betting me, I'm not a bookmaker, but if I was a bookmaker and I'm just getting a bunch of public action on a Monday night football game, I'm getting a lot of it and it's not sharp action, and these are customers where if you're profiling your customers and these are long-term losing customers or recreational customers, moving the line there is just like brain dead in my opinion. So you have a $150,000 decision on a football game. Oh, great, wow. 4.5% is such a huge edge. They're going to lose it back eventually. But getting in a situation now where you move the number too much and now a sharp comes and takes the other side. And this is what the sharps really don't want you to say, because the sharps want the bookmakers to move the number on public action because they want to come in and get the value at post and bet the other way. But in reality, bookmaking is pretty easy. Some of the dumbest people I know in the world are bookmakers. but they've been able to, not Matthew excluded, of course, but they've been able to just carve out this living by just having the best of it their whole time. And it's just like, you're in the gambling business and you don't want to gamble and you have the best of it. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's I think the point is a lot of bookmakers, and I'm in agreement with you on this, do want to gamble. I think, with all due respect to Matthew, I'm speaking
But
for him.
Matthew last year said they would take $1 million from anyone in the world if they just came to Canada Gaming and they weren't scared of anyone.
Hold on one second, because I had in my pool, the over-under
That's
on you.
the only reason I showed up
the
here, by the
over-under
way.
on you bringing that up was 25 minutes, so I think we're about there.
But I mean, they said, Canada Gaming said they would take any bet from anyone for any amount of money. They're not scared of anyone. We have this Midas. It's the greatest thing ever. We make these lines. We're so good. We have all this data.
We're the largest
big
licensed
data.
bookmaker in the United States. We
Okay,
take
yeah,
bigger bets than anybody in the United States
Okay, but so
legally. I
what's
mean, we could talk about offshore illegal sports, or we could talk about the largest licensed
Okay, but what do
bookmaker
you
in the
take?
United States.
What do you take?
It's different for every player. I mean, it's
Okay, but
different
you
limitations
said
on
you would
different
take
games.
100,000 from anyone.
What
in
would
the
you take
world.
from Bob?
Well, ask Bob what we take from Bob.
5,000, Chad.
That's it.
5,000. A little less than 100,000, a little less than $1 million. But it's still a big bet. I mean, 5,000 is still a big bet comparative to other bookmakers. The
Why
issue
would
I
you
have
take
is
more
that-
than $5,000 from Bob?
It's not my decision what we take from Bob.
But the
Bob,
issue isn't.
if I was taking Bob's NBA action this year, I probably would take more than 5,000 from
Yeah,
Bob.
maybe you would, but you still don't. But guess what? You still don't. So
We probably should, though.
well, let's do it right now. Let's come up to an agreement. let's talk. We've got, what is it? I can be back in Vegas by tomorrow at 4 in the afternoon.
Wow.
So tell me what you'll take from me this
I
weekend.
mean, again, those decisions aren't mine to be made.
But you just said something.
Well, I just said, I understand you're probably not having the best NBA season thus far. A lot of sharps aren't.
Okay, but I'll keep on betting.
Okay, sure.
With
We'll
nothing
keep
if
on
not stubborn,
taking it.
so I'll keep on trying.
All right, so let me ask a different question. How much would you take from Jeff, who's not Bob?
Well, again, it's different for each person. For each customer in each sport, and it also has not everything to do with the person individually as much as it has to do with the sport. A Sunday night football game where you're going to get millions and millions of dollars of action because the game's isolated and it's high profile and it's on national television means you can anticipate more money coming in on the other side or more money being distributed, which allows you to take bigger bets. It's not all isolated to a player.
Back to what he was saying, which I find interesting, which is this idea, and if you read Chad's book, which is a great book,
Thanks, buddy.
It's a great book. You talk about this whole idea of bookmakers wanting uneven action and of, like you said, wanting to make decisions. Why don't you guys want to make more decisions? You just have a philosophy where you want, it seems like, and equating this to me, we used to talk about how the casinos were stupid for spending as much time as they did trying to catch card counters.
They
because
do,
the amount of
they
money
do
that
want
we
to take big
them.
decisions. They do. That's why they welcome someone who wants to bet 5. I mean, I give Canada a hard time. They'll take a small bet for me. But if you actually do want to go in and bet an ESPN Sunday night football game or Monday night football game, and you want to bet $250,000 5 minutes before post, they're probably one of the few places in the world that will take that bet.
It.
Yeah. So that part is. But that's a little bit different than we're not scared of anybody. We'll take $1 million from anyone to come on. Just say that, and then I'll have a little more respect. So it's a little bit of differences. They do actually want to gamble. I think Matthew was, I don't know if he was confused or if he was what, but they do actually want to gamble. If you walk in there, if I walked in there and wanted to bet a football game on the Super Bowl or something, I'm sure they'd take like $255. I know a friend of mine bet $500,000 on the Super Bowl at Canada Gaming. So they do take big bets, but they take big bets on coin flips, not on games where someone has an edge, which is smart.
Well, do you think when they take your $5,000, are they taking it because they want to use it?
I think they're
use the
taking it
information.
because it would be really, really, look, bookmaking is a parasitic business in general. I mean, you have people who are losing and they're degenerates and they want to lose and they welcome those people. I think it's just a courtesy. It's like, hey, we'll take 5,000. We're going to lose a little bit of money. Maybe it'll help us improve our line. And so I think it's the least they could do is to take $5,000 from a sharp. It's the least you can do is have posted limits and take that minimum amount from everybody, no matter who you are. And I think that's probably why they do it. But sometimes we put when I was there, we would put the bet on the tablet and the little wheel would spin and it would spin and it would spin and it would spin. And then the bet would get declined. That would happen like 30% of the time. And then during that period, the lines would move elsewhere. So there are some shenanigans going on at some points.
All right, so back now, you said you don't think that, you're not afraid of, you want him to bet NBA with you right now because you don't
That's
think
what he
everyone's
said,
having an NBA.
That's
This is
just
all
what I heard.
cool,
That's
but-
what I heard from
So
someone.
what have you heard in terms of NBA this year?
Really, it's been an awkward season. So there's been some.
As awkward as this panel right now?
This is definitely not quite as awkward as this panel, but getting there, yeah. The Lakers are a perfect example. That team is flip-flop style of play, and at least 4 times this year. So, and there's been some strange sort of variance in some weird teams. Cleveland, when Anderson Varejao was there, and after, they can't stop anyone in the middle. There's just been some really strange variants. Like Bob mentioned, people are taking an inordinate amount of threes, which is more of a chance type play than normal. So as people take more threes, you have nights where you don't hit any of those. And
I think what's happened with basketball this year is that, with the Pinnacle, no one wants to talk about Pinnacle, but, Pinnacle we were not allowed to bet in the United States of America on Pinnacle for a number of years. But this is the year where you really cannot bet in the United States of America with Pinnacle. So what's happened is that there aren't very many places where you could actually place wagers anymore. So if you're a sharp guy or you're my competition and you're trying to bet and you're betting at 7 o'clock in the morning, there's very few places where you can actually get a bet down. And I'm even doing the same thing. I'm not taking chances anymore. I'm betting with places I know my bets are safe. I'm betting smaller amounts because the market has just shrunk so much. There's really no advantage for me to try to take chances with bookmakers and try to I'm not trying to bet a lot of money nowadays anyways. I mean, I'll bet with like a reputable place like Cantor if they want to take a bet, but I'm not going to run the risk of losing, then run the risk of getting stiffed. So I'm just happy making smaller bets. And I think a lot of other people are also happier making smaller bets. They're happier betting. If you look at the overnight lines for basketball, they're moving a lot. And so if you could bet the opening line that the bookmaker comes up with overnight, I mean, if I could bet that number, I would have a huge edge. But I could bet like $1,000 on that number. It's not something I would be interested in. I'm more waiting till the morning of the game or whatever. Then I can bet, instead of 1,000, I can bet maybe a little bit more.
And at that point, the market settled quite a bit.
My point is that by the time Cantor's opened up or these other places that I would bet have opened up at 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning, the line is pretty good this year. It's a pretty good line. And because of the overnight geniuses have put a lot of value and they've made the line better.
And you see the significant movements this year, like he said, from the overnights to the...
Yeah, games are opening like 195 at 6 o'clock the night before, and by 8 o'clock in the morning, the line's like 189.5. That's just happening this year.
Sure.
Because those guys aren't waiting around to bet places in the morning, because they don't have any market to bet in the morning. They don't have Pinnacle in the morning anymore. They don't have this. So it's a weird market this year. It's a little bit different. No one can really bet money.
So going back to sort of a tweet that you sent out a while ago and something that we talked about.
I don't actually send out my own tweets. That's like someone else. It's my
There
marketing team.
was
that
something
send out
about
tweets.
about Houston breaking models all over the place.
Yeah, Houston is like I mean, if you look at the way Houston is playing, there's no data that you could possibly have, no matter how short-term or fresh your data is, that could give you a significant enough sample for just a computer number to spit out and predict a decent Houston total, because they're playing so vastly different than they were even at the start of the year or last year. I mean, this is a team that's shooting like some games 43 pointers a game. That's very unusual.
So how do you balance this? This comes to this question of like when you have a model, how do you understand whether it's stable over time?
A track record, basically. I've been doing this for a number. I mean, I have a lot of faith in my numbers. Like, I may be having a bad year, but I still have a lot of faith in my numbers. And so I balance it. There's lots of different ways you can weight. You look at, so the game of basketball is random, but there's ways you can evaluate the game of basketball that aren't random. So you can look at a game and say this team was very lucky. They hit this many % of their shots. So you look at that type of stuff and you can say, okay, is our model more accurate than not? Sure, we got a bad break in this game. And then the number one way you evaluate it is win or loss over the course of the year. You're winning money, your model's pretty good. If you're losing money, it's probably not. And you have to balance that with short-term
That's difficult, right? Because you just said it, like, you'll keep betting with him because you're stubborn. But at some point, when is the stubbornness something you need to reevaluate?
Well, you have there's all kinds of, there's T-stat ratio, there's all kinds of ratios you can do to find out whether or not something is short-term variance or whether it is actually sustained.
Do you do that? Do you go back and look at your stuff?
Yeah, of course, always. We're always looking. The strike year is a perfect example. If I would have bet my model the way the model wanted to in the strike year, I would have went broke, because the strike year was a completely different year. or lockout year, whatever, I don't know, lockout, whatever. It was a complete, I mean, players were dribbling the ball off their feet out of bounds like 4 or 5 times a game. So the model doesn't know that teams didn't have a training camp. They didn't have that players are coming in overweight. That the schedule is compressed. So a human being can add. So we were going in and we're like looking at the short-term statistics. Okay, is this random or is this something that is going to continue for the rest of the season? And you make those decisions, and that's where I think maybe last year we separated ourselves from other people, is because I have a lot of experience watching the sport. I know a lot about the sport. I spend a lot of time. We collect our own data. We're charting different stuff. We were able to make adjustments that maybe other people weren't. Now, maybe this year we're not for whatever reason, but I think it has a lot to do with also, it's just not as exciting and I was like super excited. I saw the panel last year and I heard Canada was going to take like 100,000 from anyone, $1 million. I was like so pumped for the basketball season. Then I get older and I find out I can only bet 5,000. It's like, dude, do you really want to put in 80 hours a week and you could only bet 5,000 at the biggest licensed bookmaking operation in the world?
United States.
In the United States? Yeah, it's tough.
So how did you guys do last year in the NBA?
Like he said, I think we did fairly well early. Everybody's data wasn't reflective of what was happening. People came in, like he said, out of shape, unprepared.
How long did it take you to adjust their lines?
Very quickly. So we anticipated that. I think a lot of people did anticipate that too, but what happened is, so like Bob said, people would anticipate that, but if you just went purely by models, your models would get crushed.
Everyone anticipated it, but they underestimated the impact of it. And it seemed to be getting worse and worse as the season progressed.
That's right.
Until it finally...
And then it turned around all of a sudden, and the game started catching up to on pace.
Right.
But for a while, it seemed to get really, really bad, and I think everyone projected probably some variance of under, but it was really a big variance of under. So people were still using their models, and they were using what they thought the perception percentage was, and their perception percentage was significantly off from what really happened.
The other thing that was tough last year is that I found I struggled personally with my own stuff last year, was that the schedule was compressed and there were so many games every night. Like, I love the way the schedule is now, like a normal schedule. Thursday, there's 2 games. You can take Thursday off. You can relax. You can do whatever. But last year, there was no break. There was like an average of 7-point-something games
Teams
a night.
playing 3 nights in a row.
And you just couldn't catch your breath. So even if you wanted to react to individual stuff you were seeing, there were so many games being played in such a short period of time that you really couldn't wrap your head around it. I mean, I hated last year for that reason, because there's just so many games, there was never a chance to catch your breath.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say to Bob, if it's harder and harder to get money down,
Yes.
what's the value in continuing to do it?
And what am I going to do? I'm not qualified to do anything else. I mean, what am I going to do? I become a professional tweeter? I mean, what am I going to do?
Well, you're not even tweeting your own stuff. You got people for that.
No, I mean, I don't know. I enjoy the sport. I love watching basketball. Look, I'll watch basketball whether I have a bet on the game or I don't have a bet on the game. I'm going to watch basketball. I love the game of basketball. So for me, it's the intellectual challenge of like beating someone and being right about something. So yeah, I may not put in as much time and effort because I can't bet as much money, but it's still, at the end of the day, you're right or you're wrong about something, and I do enjoy that.
So some questions from the audience. This one goes to you, Matt. There has been noticeably less college basketball totals posted this year as opposed to past years.
Yeah, I heard that from some people, and I noticed that early in the season they were posting them, across the board as.
Isn't they you?
No,
Yeah.
Pinnacle's the Pinnacle's. When Pinnacle has a total, then other people are more looking at it. Pinnacle doesn't post a total, nobody's posting a total.
It's for a long time. Let me go ahead and answer the question. For a long, because I know, right? For a long time, there's a difference between an offshore sports book who can't legally take bets from the United States.
This is not a test of your manhood.
So
okay? we're fine. We're fine with this.
Yeah, for a long time it was very ordinary for Las Vegas sports books to take televised collegiate basketball totals only.
Right.
And then we expanded that to most games. I think because they continue to expand the amount of conferences, that workload has got to be really big, and it's not attracting the attention. So when an average tourist comes in and he wants to make a bet, he's not betting Wolford Furman under 138.
The reason why is because they can't make money on
action.
them. Right. Yeah, it's just they're hard to make a line.
There's no demand. It's hard to make a line.
The only people who want to bet it are the guys who ask for it.
Well, I was going to say, the demand is from the professionals who they're going to lose money to.
What percentage of money that you guys receive is from professionals?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's how do you determine a professional? So if a professional is someone who only makes his money betting.
How about a sharp rather than a professional?
I think a sharp's a better question. Yeah. And obviously we get more bets from the public and the amount of money bet is bigger with the sharps. Let's just put it that way. I can't give you the exact.
Well, do you mean the amount of money per bet?
The amount of money per bet is significantly higher with the sharps.
The sharps are betting the limit, whatever the limit the
That's
sportsbook
right.
posts.
Whatever
and,
we'll give to each
So
individual. they
what
always
percentage
post
is this? Because it's very interesting to me that you put so much effort into the sharps. So that must be a high percentage of.
I don't know that we put as much effort into sharps as you think. I think we really put an effort into anticipated handle on each event. So if we think one event, a college basketball game, for example, using that same Wolford-Furman example, again, that's probably a 95% sharp game.
Only
95%
5%
of
of
the
it's
action
just
you get
public
on it
money.
will be sharp. No, the general public isn't coming in to bet Wolford and Furman. So
Not
when you
all the
post
Wolford
those games,
alumni.
when you post that game, you're getting 98% sharp action, where the New England Patriots versus the San Francisco 49ers Monday Night Football, you may get 80% public
Yeah, right.
action. So, I mean.
When you guys started up, though, I think you had this idea that you were going to take on the sharps, and you thought, and I think what happened is you realized how difficult it is. It's difficult.
Sure, of
and
course.
I think when they did open up, they were talking about they would take this amount and that amount. But I think over time they just realized, why are we beating our head against the wall? We've got all this overhead. We've got all these people working for us. It's. I mean, look, in Vegas isn't really built on trying to. This from blackjack, catering to professionals. It's not really.
Well, I mean, like if someone would let me bet $5,000 on a blackjack hand, I'd be really happy.
Right.
So I can't even
Yeah,
get
but
down.
how many blackjack hands are you playing an hour?
He's not allowed to play blackjack anymore.
Well, I'm just saying, blackjack is different because 5,000 a hand versus 5,000 a game is completely different. I'm betting on 3 games a night.
Yeah,
if
but
you could
like,
only play
what-
3 blackjack
so-
hands
But what you
a night,
said,
you wouldn't be so excited.
what you said to me is, I think, really interesting, right? You said that the courtesy that they have to let you bet, right?
Right.
But the casinos have zero courtesy to let us play blackjack.
Right, well, it's
I
a-
can't play blackjack anywhere.
Right, that's a joke, I think. But I'm just
Yeah.
saying, it's
So when you open your casino, can I play blackjack there?
Sure, absolutely. All day.
See, there we go. All day. We heard it again. You make your $1 million bet, I'll go play blackjack at his casino. So some more questions from the panel, from the audience. We're talking a little bit about baseball having less vig and lots of games to bet on. Have you ever played around with baseball?
not really, just because I
just
did this story that's in Nate's book about we tried the model we did, but baseball is so boring to me to watch baseball. I mean, and the games start at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. It's just like all day nonstop. So we did do baseball model. We tried it. There was like an error in the code, and basically that once I saw that error, I was like, hey, enough with this baseball. I'm just like completely done. We stopped betting baseball, and I have no interest in getting back involved.
It also
in
is
baseball.
just a hard thing to keep up with. I mean, you need to know
The people on the internet
relievers,
have
the
really solved
pitchers.
baseball. The sabermetricians on the internet have really done a good job of solving. I mean, the VIG is lower, but the people on the internet, like whether it's these websites like Fangraphs or whatever, all these sites, the book that the guy you talked about, Mickey, wrote, they've really done a good job of really illuminating to everyone what the value of a baseball player is. And that's kind of like the worry with basketball when it gets to be that way. I think maybe I might have to pick up my ball and go home because everyone has basically educated everybody. It becomes difficult.
So when you think about baseball bettors, do you talk to many of them? Has the edge disappeared because of the public knowledge of
Oh,
saber?
no, not at all. No, because you still need to be paying attention to it every day. If you want to be a professional baseball bettor, you need to know what the guy did the night before, especially when it comes, middle relief is so important when it comes to baseball, and what is happening with a guy from one night to the next night, and what is happening over the course of a series. If you miss a night, then you're at a disadvantage. So no matter what the stats are saying, this is where it comes in.
So
Some
you're
of the-
telling me
some of
that
the, hold on,
middle-
some of the subjectivity
Right.
that Bob is talking about, sort of where you need to see things and relate them to the objectivity that you know from a formula or from whatever Fangraphs or whomever else
Right.
is spitting out. You need to be able to calculate what that is from an instinctive perspective.
So the middle relievers you think are important in betting baseball?
It's hugely important.
So
I think
the-
a
in
bullpen
the
is
sims,
hugely
the
important.
simulations people do, they guess what middle relievers are going to
The
come
very
in.
best people at betting baseball aren't necessarily the model builders, but like Chad said, the people that watch every night. Because that team that uses up their bullpen, that goes into 13 innings or gave up a bunch of runs early and then had to use them again the next day, that third day they're not even available. You bring some guys out of the pen you just know aren't good.
There
That's
are guys
why-
beating baseball. Using
That's
the
right.
model.
There's
There
guys that
are,
beat
and then they're
baseball
with
every year.
But it's not me. I'm not doing anything.
That's why a lot of guys now, I was talking to a guy before, he's like, I'm just betting the 5-inning line because it's like you're not getting into the bullpen. You're sort of dependent on that's where you can focus on what the starting pitching is.
I know that's what makes baseball unique, is the entire starting line is based on starting pitching, but the bullpen has such a high impact. Basically, the first 5, if you go by the average of what starters pitch, the first half of the game is the starters, and the second half is a bullpen, and the bullpen isn't necessarily a very large variance in the line that's produced. So, considering they have an impact on almost half the game normally.
Baseball is also hard because it's a money line. Generally, people are generally betting the money line. If you're betting the favorites, you got to bet so much more to make a little, versus you got to really find that opportunity in the price to actually make a living at it.
Well, so that brings up a good question, which is, and I'll throw this out to any of you guys, are there any, historically, have there been any sort of systemic advantages to betting certain types of bets? I.e., like, is it always better to bet is it always good to bet a double-digit dog in the NFL? Or has it been,
Historically.
what's that?
Historically,
all
it
those
is.
things I think in the past have, you know, the funny thing is like the message boards with the internet, or like you used to be able to make money if you bet just underdogs in baseball in like 2003, and all you bet were underdogs, and you got the best available price betting every underdog in baseball, you would make money. Not even the best, but just like an average of closely, that actually made money. But as time goes on, people just become so sharp, and there's so many database guys who look at stuff like this that I think most of those edges have gone away, and the ones that are left, it won't be too long before they're gone as well.
Are there any left that you know of?
If I knew, I would tell everybody here, of course, so they could all partake in the riches of sports betting.
There you go.
Right.
But even look at the NFL this year. I mean, we were talking about this last night in our secret conclave where we talked about the real stuff. That this year in the NFL, you couldn't even depend on if you had a double-digit, if you had a 7-point favorite in the NFL and they were winning by 21 points in the fourth quarter, you still weren't done sweating that game. I mean, there was no real comfort level.
What do you attribute that to?
The ball is shaped very.
No, you know what it is. I think you can attribute that to analytics a little bit. Like in the old days, the idea that these coaches were very, they're still conservative in football, but in the old days, you have people. If you're an underdog football team or an underdog basketball team, you almost have to take a high variance approach to win. That's the right mathematical game theory optimal way to play most times. And people weren't realizing that back in early 2000s. They were playing not to lose the game and to keep the game close. They knew they weren't going to win. And if you were to ask an average coach, you've got a 30% chance of winning this game, but when you lose, you're going to lose by 15 plus. Or you have a 10% chance of winning this game, but when you lose, you're going to lose by 6. I think most coaches back in the day, and still maybe even still to this day, would say, I'll take they may not say it, but they'll play the strategy where they lose by less, but it gives them less opportunity to win. Whereas I think in football now, teams are taking a lot more chances. They're taking more of a high variance approach. The game is changing a little bit, especially in college. There's a lot more innovation in college football than there is in the NFL.
And so the passing has something to do with it.
Yeah,
don't you agree?
people
I mean,
are
they
just
throw the ball so much. These teams, used to have teams that really knew how to run the clock out in the fourth quarter, pound the football, power run the football, and now everybody's offenses are so geared toward passing that you get in the fourth quarter, you tell them to run the clock out, and they're like, how do we do that?
Can't even count on the Patriots to do that anymore.
no.
No.
So back to this is kind of an interesting question, right? Which is this idea that analytics influences, sort of like changes the world of gambling, right? And like one of the things that we had talked a little bit about is just some trends in the NBA this year, right? I mean, what are there things that you've seen that analytics has influenced in the NBA that have caused changes in scoring?
Sure, there's like the three-point thing that we talked about. Teams are just playing like a more, they're trying different strategies strategically at the end of games, maybe a little bit more than they used to. But it's not league-wide, it's more of an individual. It's also pretty random. Like I watched a game the other day where the Celtics were playing the Trailblazers, and the Celtics were down 6 with 24 seconds left, and literally walked off the court. Portland had the ball, and the Celtics just walked off the court down 6 with 24 seconds left. Then the next night, Toronto was down 9 with 16 seconds left, and they were rushing to foul the guy. So there's just like, sometimes I think it's a weird situation. So I don't know if that's necessarily something that analytics is changing. Maybe Toronto has an analytics department that says, we're going to foul more and try to extend the game. Or maybe Boston's just like, look, we're an old-ass team who plays tomorrow. You're just going to go home.
Just going to go to the club.
Yeah, we're just going to go to sleep. Forget about going to the club. We're going to go to sleep.
Do you see changes, like specifically around the NFL that we're talking about? We've all said it, right? Scoring's up. I mean,
Yeah.
You don't need to be
A genius,
you know that scoring's up. Do you see that trend continuing? Like, how have you guys adjusted to that? I mean, like,
Well,
there's
it's
certain teams like the Saints and the Packers and whatnot.
I actually do think it will continue to trend up for a little while. I mean, how much can it trend up? But they just continue to make rule changes every single year to give the offense more advantage and affect what the defense can do. And some of them are genuinely made for safety. And I think they're all actually genuinely made for safety with the NFL and the scrutiny that they're under now. But some of them are giving a real detriment to the defense. And the problem with the defense is they've been taught one way their entire careers, and suddenly they're inflicted with these rules changes that affect the way they tackle and cover people and when they can put their hands on them, and it's giving a lot of advantages to the offenses, and we're seeing it in the passing game. So I imagine until these rule changes all get settled and people start really getting adapted and have been able to use them in college or longer in their careers, then you'll probably continue to see an upward trend for the short term at least.
So do you think that models built on historical data need to look back how many seasons in the NFL?
Well, I don't want to tell anyone how to build a model, but I think no matter what model you're building, you should
learn how to build a model first.
You should probably, how you weight your older data is, you need to be careful how you weight your older data.
Right.
And, especially in the NFL, which is a rapidly evolving league, I think Major League Baseball stayed fairly consistent in what they've done. They don't have a lot of rule changes. The umpires, the way they call balls and strikes haven't changed much, so your model's probably stayed fairly, viable over the last 5 years. But if you had a 5-year equal weight model in the NFL, you'd be like, oh my God, it'd be
The issue
all
also
over
is
the place.
your 5-year model in baseball is going to have 5 years times 162 games.
That's right.
Per
Right.
team, whereas the 5-year model in football is going to have 16 games.
So how would you advise someone
To
build
build a
a model in the
football?
NFL?
I'd do the thing where they put the dog food out and they give the dog a chance to see which ball he wants to come out. I mean, the NFL to me is just so random. I don't know. I'm sure people beat it and they're really good at it, but to me it's the most random. I watch the game and it's the most random thing ever.
Well, what's interesting that people do, and I don't advocate doing this, but they base they build models around situations. And so you have, situational betting that people do. So over the past 35 years, when X happens, Y is the result.
That's not a model. That's a situational.
That's not a model.
That's a
It's
situational handicapper.
completely situational, but that's
What do
the
you think a
closest thing
situational
to
handicapper?
what you can do with the NFL.
I think it can be good. I mean, if you're smart enough to know what is random and what isn't random. I was a situational handicapper. I made all my money being a situational handicapper back in the day. I wasn't using
Explain what a situation might be.
I don't know, Team X maybe would play a certain way against a team they rated to win against versus a team they rated to lose against. They play different styles.
So like a
I don't talk about specific teams.
No, I'm not trying to give you good. I'm just saying I just want them to understand what situations.
So like
mean.
in football, maybe in
It's like
situations.
they lost the game the night before. and now
No,
they're
it could
playing
be like
different.
it could be like a football team that's a 17 or 14 point dog in the NFL. Some teams might play a lot lower scoring, a lot more patient. The type of thing where the coach says, "Look, in the second half we're down 20." A good one is in football. In the second half of a football game, team's down 24-0 at the half. Some teams situationally will say, "Okay, we're going to try to play fast and get back and throw the ball," and some teams will just run the ball and just give up. That's a situation that I think is valid betting second half football. Certain teams, how they relate and how they decide to play in the NFL based on what the score of the game is at half, how close they are or how far away they are in terms of being able to compete. That's something. The Patriots are a good example. The Patriots for a number of years when they were up big would just completely shove the ball down the other team's throat and just obliterate them. Whereas the Steelers would just run the ball and run complete 40 seconds of play clock every time and use the full play clock. And so those second halves generally went under more than over when the Steelers were winning big versus when the Patriots were winning big. That's a situational handicapper.
Do you guys worry about, or do you have situational stuff in your models much?
Yeah, the second halves are really, I think, halftime wagers, especially in the second half, are obviously the most vulnerable situation for sports books. And like Bob mentioned, those games where the first half is way out of whack with what the whole game line should have been is where you can become vulnerable and you have to kind of make a gauge as to what's happening in the game at that point.
It's
So
very
it's-
tough to make a line, too. You're
That's
having
right.
to put the line up within 35 to 40 seconds.
That's
and
right.
then the bettor can sit there and wait 15 minutes to decide when he do his research and decide whether he wants to make a bet.
I thought that was nice of him that he supported you like that.
Yeah, thanks.
I have
We're
nothing-
warming up to each other. We're
No,
warming
I'm
up to
just-
each other.
I'm just
we
like-
just met yesterday. I think he's a great guy.
I'm just disappointed because I literally flew all the way out here because I saw this
To
panel.
bet $1 million.
The guy said he would take like any amount of money. I was like, I got to come back from Europe and get to this panel because I might have to move to Vegas, move back to the United States. Forget about Europe.
I was hoping you'd bring like a case.
I'd have to borrow. I'd have to find some investors. He already said I'm losing all my money this year betting on basketball. So I'm hoping to meet someone here
We
who
could
will
take up a
bankroll me.
collection.
Right.
Yeah.
Does any audience people have a question at all?
I guess
Yeah.
he does.
This is for the football guys mostly. With the trends the last couple of years, do you think that giving a home team 3 points is a strategy has been antiquated? It seems like more and more road teams are coming, especially
So
Are
the
you
question,
talking
hold on.
just
The question,
NFL?
the question is the traditional 3 points for home field, is that an antiquated notion now?
No, I don't necessarily. Maybe in the NFL, it seems like it in the last couple of years, it sort of had an abnormality in the amount of road teams covering against favored teams, and the distinction may be out of line with what a longer model would produce. But I think in collegiate football still, I mean, there's nothing like a home field advantage.
I think in the NFL, the answer is yes, depending on the team. The home field for the Jacksonville Jaguars is not worth 3 points, but home field for the Packers is still worth 3 points or maybe more. And I think that what you're seeing is certainly bookmakers I talk to are understanding that a little bit more, and they are weighing that a lot more heavily because they recognize no one's going to those games, and there's no advantage to playing at home there. So why automatically give them the 3 points? They're being much more proactive about that.
What sports scare you the most?
What sports scare us the most? Again, I think one of the most
obscure
difficult sports for us and our biggest challenge is probably collegiate basketball in November and December because these teams are playing out of conference schedules, which are normally against teams like they have no history of playing against, and our focus is so dispersed amongst a large. It's the time where on a Saturday you could have 300 games between hockey, NBA, college basketball, NFL, college football, and you're just spread so thin, and that's probably one of the biggest vulnerabilities. And while I know Bob mentioned golf and NASCAR and MMA, and
Limits are so small. So they're a big
yeah, if the limits are small in sports like golf and everything, so there's risk for people to be able to beat golf, MMA, boxing, NASCAR, and that kind of stuff. But obviously
Their
the book,
exposure for
does a risk analysis, and they just take smaller limits in those cases.
Any other questions from the crowd? Yeah.
Someone in the red over there.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't think he's going to answer that question.
What's the largest bet you guys have ever taken?
I'm not allowed to talk about any individual bets.
$1 million.
Any other questions?
How does the book adjust to in the NFL? You see offensive coaches like Trustman or Chip Kelly that really don't have any historical base to.
So the question is, how does the bookmakers, how do they adjust to new coaches that they have zero data on?
Yeah, well, I think the book's under the same challenge as the bettors at
Yeah,
that
they
point.
make a guess.
That's right.
And they go from there. They rapidly adjust it based on the money coming in and the results.
That's right.
Sorry. I wanted a question from
Good
me,
enough.
and then they
Yeah.
gave me a
Go ahead,
question.
take it. I mean, that's
disappointed me.
pretty much it.
Well, how
I
do
mean,
you adjust to new coaches? I mean,
Same thing. I make a guess, and then I use my opinion, and then as we start getting more data, we start using less and less opinion, more and more data,
Right.
and then go from there.
So last question for you, Bob. Or for anyone actually, what do you think that teams could learn most from professional gamblers?
I think it's interesting because I'm pretty sure, like talking to some of these teams, I'm pretty sure that in my lifetime I've spent more money on analytics than some of these teams have. So I think the one thing they could probably, no, I'm just being honest, is the one, I was listening, overhearing a conversation where one team said they didn't want to spend the $10,000 it costs to run the cable to the SportView data to get the shot clock because it was $10,000. It was too much money to get the actual shot clock camera there. They're going to wait till they renovated the arena and do it then because they'd save $10,000. Whereas for me, I'd be like, oh my goodness, that's ridiculous. I would just spend the $10,000. The one thing I think you would learn is maybe just evaluating your prediction methods. All these teams are running models and doing stuff. They need some way of evaluating it. And a good way of doing that is to evaluate against the point spread, is to look and see if they're able to come up with a model based on players' worth and then test that against a point spread, and they're actually able to break even or do well against it, then they know their model is probably decent.
That's cool. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's some things to be learned from it as far as, also fraud prevention and issues like that, where teams, as we look at, games that are attracting abnormal amounts of action, why does money suddenly come in on a game, and is it injuries or is it data, or, because it's interesting sometimes, why does money randomly come in on some of these games that normally aren't bet or you don't anticipate getting them on, and I think that, that stuff's probably helpful to them as far as why are people betting on your team, and, is it because of the players, is it because the team's hot, is it because everybody loves LeBron, or...
It is interesting after the trade line when a team acquires a player to see how the perceived value of the team that they might have varies from the actual opening line. That might be something
Milwaukee's a perfect example of that. I mean, because the trade deadline was so quiet this year, Milwaukee acquired J.J. Redick. Suddenly, Milwaukee became like a talked about team where he's seeing a lot more action on Milwaukee. The futures prices dropped on him, and it's J.J. Redick.
J.J. Redick?
It's J.J. Redick.
I'll give him
this
to
wasn't
you.
Josh
Chad's
Smith, it was
middle
J.J.
relievers.
Redick.
Okay, thanks guys for the time.